There is a wound somewhere close to you. You may not see it yet. It might be wearing the face of a teenager who shuts down every time you raise your voice. A young adult who keeps choosing the wrong people. A child who goes quiet in ways that feel too familiar. A younger sibling, a student, a colleague. Someone whose pain looks strangely, uncomfortably like something you once knew. Carl Jung would say, that is not a coincidence. He would say, that wound does not belong to them. Not entirely. It belongs to someone in the generation before them. Someone who never looked at it, never named it, never sat alone in the dark with it long enough to understand what it was asking. And if you are watching this video, there is a good chance that someone is you. My name is not important right now. What matters is this idea. One of the most quietly devastating ideas in the history of psychology. That the pain we refuse to feel does not disappear. It travels. It moves downstream. It finds the next available body and settles in. And that body is almost always younger, softer, and far less prepared to carry it. Jung called the person capable of healing this wound the wounded healer. But here is what most people never tell you about that concept. Jung himself never actually used those words. What he said was, wounded physician. The popular phrase is a softening, a translation, a way of making bearable something that was never meant to be comfortable. Because the truth is harder than a comforting title. The truth is, the wound is the qualification. To understand what that means, you have to understand who Carl Gustav Jung actually was. Not the icon on the motivational poster. Not the man with the pipe and the archetypes. But the boy underneath all of that. He was born in 1875 in a small Swiss village. The son of a pastor who had long since lost his faith. And a mother who suffered from a mental illness severe enough that she was institutionalized when Jung was 3 years old. 3 years old. Think about what that does to a child. One day your mother is there. The next day she is simply gone, taken away, and no one gives you language for what just happened. There is no explanation a 3-year-old can hold. There is only absence and the body's primitive conclusion. Something is wrong with me. Something about love is dangerous. Something about closeness leads to disappearance. Jung internalized everything. He had no siblings. He turned to books. He turned inward. And he became, quietly, a boy with 2 people living inside him. He called them number 1 and number 2. Number 1 was the schoolboy, the child of his time, the one who went to class and played and tried to fit in. Number 2 was something older, something timeless, an authority from the past, a voice that felt ancient even in a child's body. He once carved a tiny mannequin from the end of a wooden ruler. He hid it in a pencil case in the attic, along with a painted stone. He wrote its scrolls in a language he invented himself, a language no one else could read. He was, of course, bullied at school. When Jung was 12, another boy pushed him. He fell and hit his head. He lay on the ground longer than necessary. And in that moment, in that strange suspended pause, a thought floated through him like smoke. Now you won't have to go to school anymore. And so, for the next 6 months, every time his parents tried to send him to school, Jung fainted. He was not faking exactly. The body was doing what it was told. The unconscious was running a program, and Jung, years later, would recognize that episode as his first laboratory, his first glimpse into the invisible machinery underneath conscious behavior. The mind makes the body do what the mind cannot say out loud. He would spend the rest of his life translating that sentence into a life's work. At university, something happened that would change everything. He was nearly finished with his studies when he picked up a textbook on psychiatry. A preface so charged, so alive with possibility, that he had to stand up from his chair and catch his breath. He later wrote, "Here alone the 2 currents of my interest could flow together, and in a united stream dig their own bed. Here was the empirical field, common to biological and spiritual facts, which I had everywhere sought and nowhere found. He became a psychiatrist. He took a position at the Bergholzli Asylum in Zurich, under Eugen Bleuler, the man who incidentally gave us the word schizophrenia. There, Jung began doing something unusual. He was paying very close attention to the strange, illogical things that patients said in response to ordinary words. Not dismissing them as symptoms, listening to them as messages. He noticed patterns. He noticed that when a patient gave an odd, emotionally loaded answer to a neutral word, something underneath was speaking. Something was trying to surface. He called those clusters of charged associations complexes, and in naming them, he gave language to something every human being carries, but almost no one examines. He sent his findings to a man in Vienna named Sigmund Freud. They met for the first time and talked for 13 hours without stopping. Their friendship lasted 5 years. Freud treated Jung like a son. He openly named him the heir to the psychoanalytic throne, the young genius who would carry the work forward. And for a while, that is exactly what seemed to be happening. But Jung had a wound Freud had not accounted for. Jung was not built to be anyone's heir. He was built, perhaps from that moment in the attic with the carved mannequin and the secret scrolls, to be his own authority. And when his thinking began moving in directions that contradicted Freud's dogma, when he began insisting that the psyche was not merely a machine of repressed sexual energy, but something far stranger and more sacred, Freud cut him off. He was dismissed, isolated. The psychoanalytic community was told to close ranks. And then the darkness came. In 1913, Carl Jung began to unravel. He heard voices. He had visions, surging, violent, hallucinatory images that he could not explain or control. He described gripping the edge of a table to prevent himself from flying apart. He compared the experience to a drug trip. He wondered, in sober clinical language, whether he was losing his mind. Most people, at that point, would have fought it, would have medicated it, suppressed it, walked into an office and said, "Something is wrong with me. Please make it stop." Jung did the opposite. He opened toward it. He deliberately induced the hallucinations. He sat with the voices. He asked them what they wanted. He drew what he saw, painted it in brilliant, illuminated detail, wrote down every word the darkness spoke to him. He called this process active imagination. And the record he kept of those 16 years of inner crisis, from 1914 to 1930, became the most important document he ever created. He called it the Red Book. The Red Book is bound in scarlet leather and filled with paintings that look like medieval illuminated manuscripts, mandalas, mythological figures, visions from a language older than psychology. It was once described as the most influential unpublished work in the history of psychology. Unpublished. For nearly a century, it sat in a bank vault, locked away by his family after his death. Why? Because Jung understood, perhaps better than anyone, that what was inside it was raw. It was the unprocessed ore before the refinery. It was him, not the professor, not the sage, but the man with his hands on the edge of the table, gripping against the pull of the abyss. He wrote, decades later, reflecting on those years, "The years of which I have spoken to you, when I pursued the inner images, were the most important time of my life. Everything else is to be derived from this. My entire life consisted in elaborating what had burst forth from the unconscious and flooded me like an enigmatic stream and threatened to break me." The world did not see the Red Book until 2009, nearly 50 years after his death, nearly a century after he began writing it, when the wound was finally ready to be seen. Read that again. Not the bad things the parent did, not the trauma they inflicted, the unlived life, the dreams they surrendered, the feelings they refused to feel, the parts of themselves they killed off to survive, to comply, to fit into a world that told them certain things were unacceptable. That material does not vanish. It becomes atmospheric. It becomes the emotional weather inside a family. The thing that is always present, but never named. And children, who are exquisitely sensitive instruments, tuned entirely to the frequencies of the people they depend on for survival, absorb it. They become the carriers. They develop the anxiety their parent never processed, the perfectionism that belonged to a grandparent's shame, the rage that was never allowed one generation back, the collapse, the self-sabotage, the hunger for a love no one was ever taught how to give. They carry it not because they are weak. They carry it because love, in its most primal form, is the willingness to share what another person cannot hold alone. The child says without words, "I will take this from you. You look like you need to put it down." This is what makes the title of this video more than a poetic phrase. Someone younger than you is right now carrying something that was never theirs to carry. And the reason it is still in circulation, the reason it has not yet been healed, is that no one in the line before them ever chose to do what Jung did in 1913. Instead, it got passed along, quietly, invisibly, like an inheritance no one agreed to receive. Jung's concept of the wounded healer, the physician who heals not despite their wound, but because of it, is rooted in a myth that is thousands of years older than psychology. His name was Chiron. Chiron was a centaur, half human, half horse, and the most gifted healer in the ancient Greek world. He trained Achilles. He trained Asclepius, the god of medicine. He knew every herb, every remedy, every incantation, and he carried for his entire immortal life a wound in his leg that never healed. A wound inflicted by one of Hercules' poisoned arrows. A wound that caused him constant, unrelenting pain. He could heal everyone. He could not heal himself. And this is the paradox Jung built his entire concept on. It is precisely the unhealable wound, the one you have learned to live alongside, to understand from the inside, to navigate with a kind of ruined expertise that makes you capable of sitting with someone else in theirs. The person who has never suffered does not know the landscape. They can read the map. They cannot walk the terrain. But you have walked it. You have fallen into the exact ravine someone younger is falling into right now. You have been lost in the particular darkness they are lost in. And that is not a liability. That is your qualification. Now here is where it gets strange, and Jung loved the strange, the synchronistic, the impossible coincidence that turns out to be structured meaning. During World War II, Carl Jung was working with the Allied forces, not as a soldier, as a psychologist. He was designated Agent 488 by the Office of Strategic Services, what would later become the CIA. He provided psychological profiles of Hitler, detailed analyses of the enemy's mental state, intelligence that remained classified for decades. The man who spent his life mapping the interior world was quietly helping reshape the exterior one. His wound had given him a particular kind of sight. He could look at a mind, even a monstrous mind, and see the structure underneath, the abandoned child, the unlived life, the shadow that had never been examined, swollen now to a scale that could consume a continent. He knew what happens when the wound goes unanswered. He had seen it in his own interior. He had seen it in his patients. And now he was watching it happen on a civilizational scale. The unlived life of a generation turned outward. The unexpressed shadow given a uniform. He also did something that almost no one talks about when they talk about Jung. He helped create Alcoholics Anonymous. Not directly, not by design, but a patient of his, a man named Rowland Hazard, came to him in 1926, a chronic alcoholic, having tried everything. Jung treated him, and when he was done, he told Hazard something no medical professional of that era was supposed to say. He told him that in his opinion, the only thing that could touch an addiction at that depth was a vital spiritual experience. Not willpower, not medicine, a genuine encounter with something beyond the ordinary architecture of the self. Hazard took that message to a friend. That friend took it to another. And through a chain of conversations that moved like water finding its level, it eventually reached Bill Wilson, the man who had found Alcoholics Anonymous. Jung's letter to Wilson, written near the end of his life, contains words that should be engraved somewhere visible. You see, he wrote, alcohol in Latin is spiritus, and you use the same word for the highest religious experience as well as for the most depraving poison. The helpful formula, therefore, is spiritus contra spiritum. Spirit against spirit. The craving for transcendence, turned towards something that destroys, can only be answered by the real thing. The wound that drives a person to drink is the wound that healed drives them towards something true. In the last decades of his life, Jung built a tower, with his own hands, stone by stone, at a place called Bollingen, on the shore of Lake Zurich. He designed it himself, did much of the masonry himself, kept adding to it for decades. It had no electricity, no running water. He cooked over an open fire. He wrote by candlelight. On one of the stones he carved, in Latin, a dedication, a thank offering on his 75th birthday. On another side he carved a figure, Telesphorus, a minor Greek god of healing, surrounded by an inscription that read, "This is Telesphorus, who roams through the dark regions of this cosmos, and glows like a star out of the depths. He points the way to the gates of the sun, and to the land of dreams." He was 75 years old. He was carving mythology into stone with his bare hands. Because there is something about working with your hands, about physically shaping matter, that Jung understood keeps you connected to what he called the self, the deep center, the part of you that is larger than your story, larger than your wound, larger than what was done to you. The tower was his mandala in 3 dimensions. The same impulse that made him paint those circular images during the Red Book years, the impulse to make a container strong enough to hold the whole, now expressed in stone. He was building something that would outlast him, which is, when you think about it, exactly what healing does. There is one more thing you need to know. Jung identified something he called the second half of life, and he was very clear that it has a different purpose than the first half. In the first half, the task is construction, building a self, a career, a relationship, an identity, a story about who you are and what you stand for. The ego accumulates its wins and organizes its defenses and grows taller and more certain of itself with each passing year. But at some point, usually somewhere around midlife, though the timing varies, something shifts. The tower you have been building starts to feel hollow. The questions that drove the first half, how do I succeed? How do I prove myself? How do I belong? Those questions stop having satisfying answers. New questions rise from below, quieter and more insistent. Questions like, who am I when no one is watching? What have I refused to feel? Whose life am I living? Mine or the one I was handed? Jung believed the second half of life is not about building. It is about becoming whole. It is about retrieving the parts of yourself you had to exile to survive. The sensitivity, the anger, the grief, the longing, the creativity, the wildness, and integrating them. Not performing them, not posting about them, actually sitting with them, in the dark, the way he sat with the voices in 1913. This is the work, and it is not comfortable. It was never meant to be. The wound you are carrying, the one that has been with you so long, it feels like furniture, is not a defect in your character. It is not evidence that you are broken. It is not something to perform your way out of, or optimize into a better morning routine. It is an initiation. Jung wrote, "The wound is our initiation into our fragmented self. It is the call to adventure that begins the hero's journey." And somewhere, in a house you have visited, a family you belong to, a lineage that runs through you like a river. Someone younger is standing at the mouth of the same cave. They are looking into the same darkness. They are hearing the same sounds. They do not have your map yet. They have not lived enough years to have found the terrain. They are terrified in a way you recognize because you were terrified there once too. And they are waiting, not for a perfect person, not for someone with all the answers, but for someone willing to go first. Someone willing to say, I have been in this darkness. I came out the other side, not unscathed, not unchanged, but through. This is what the wounded healer offers. Not the absence of pain, the presence of someone who knows the landscape. Jung never stopped being wounded. He was, by his own account, a complicated man, difficult, sometimes faithless in his relationships, sometimes wrong in his politics, always restless, always digging. He carried the absence of his mother. He carried the loneliness of the boy with the mannequin and the secret scrolls. He carried years of voices and visions that he was never fully certain were not madness. And at 85, dying at home in Kusnacht, he described himself with the words of the ancient Chinese sage Lao Tzu. All are clear. I alone am clouded. Still carrying, still uncertain, still human. But he had done something with the wound that most people never do. He had taken it seriously. He had gone into it, not away from it. He had let it teach him. And then he had turned what it taught him toward the people who came after. He had fulfilled the only purpose he ever believed was truly worth fulfilling. He had kindled a light of meaning in the darkness of mere being. Someone younger than you is carrying something. You know what it is. Some part of you has always known. You have seen it in their eyes, heard it in the argument they keep having, recognized the shape of the trap they keep walking into. And you have thought, maybe more than once, that there is nothing you can do, that you are not qualified, that you are too damaged yourself, too unresolved, too much a part of the very pattern that hurt them. Jung would tell you, that is exactly why you are the right person, not despite the wound, because of it.